Hello, everyone. Holly with Reality Sandwich here. Today I am joined by Angus. Hello, welcome, Angus. Thanks for being here.
I'm very happy to be here.
Excellent. Today, Angus is going to share a really interesting story about an LSD experience he had. But first, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about you. Tell us where you live, where you're from, what you're all about, Angus. Let's learn a little bit about your life.
Yeah, sure. So, I've lived the majority of my life in Australia, but I'm currently living in the UK. I have studied a variety of different things, but my favorite topic that I eventually landed on, the one that I very gladly landed on, was the study of plant medicines, human drug relations, ethnopharmacology. This is how I found my way into psychedelia, cobbled together with a few other personal experiences, one of which I'll be diving into today. And yeah, this is really how I would like to introduce myself. And I'm very, very happy to be diving into the story that I have for you guys here today.
So, would you say that you were drawn to psychedelics and plant medicines from a purely academic standpoint, or were your first experiences recreational? How did you really
Yes.
start experimenting personally?
Yeah, so my interest in it was really inspired by a whole load of different personal experiences. I tried a variety of different substances. The first one was magic mushrooms, which I actually took when I was living abroad. And that actually helped me out of a particularly challenging time in my life where I was experiencing the depths of a bit of a depressive episode for the first time ever. And it really pulled me out of that. And then once I returned home after my studies abroad, this was in Germany actually, I just really started to research it more and more. I was really quite grateful for the peace and serenity of mind that these substances had offered me during that dark episode. And I just started to research it. I moved into this very curious, explorative phase. This was just at the beginning of lockdown 2020, so I had all the time in the world to really dive into it. I was finishing my final year of my bachelor's in environmental engineering at the time, but I already knew that I was not consciously, but subconsciously, that I was growing more and more disconnected with this subject. And I was moving closer to this field that I've just become fully passionate about. And I am now dedicating much of my time to. But I first moved into it. I had these experiences that were really quite remedial. I started exploring it more and more, started to read about all the different greats who had contributed to this field. I researched the McKenna brothers. I looked into really just a big one for me was an ethnobotanist named Richard Evan Schultz, which is the reason why I moved into the field of ethnobotany and ethnopharmacology as well. And because of this, as well as a load of other people in this space, I mean, there's so many now, and they have contributed so many great pieces of work. But particularly from an ethnobotanical point of perspective, I was drawn into this topic. I really enjoyed learning about really just the ancient heritage, as well as the many different societies who use these medicines to achieve these different states, to heal, to bring community together, to really lead community-led objectives, and yeah, so that's what led me into psychedelia, and yeah, that's what brings me to today.
I love that. I've always find it fascinating when I talk to people that are pursuing this, in a more academic light, because I have to assume you have so much access to information that maybe we're just not, not that this information isn't publicly available, but you just have the opportunity to explore things so in depth. And I love that. I love learning, hearing about people that are going to be bringing forth new information. And I'm fully confident that you're going to do some pretty cool stuff in your line of work as you continue to study as well.
Yeah.
So, so you'd had some initial experiences with mushrooms, etc.
Mhm.
Um, this story you're about to share today, was this your first experience with LSD, or had you?
No,
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 okay.
very thankfully not. This was not my first experience with LSD because that would have blown my top off. This was about my third or fourth experience with LSD at the time. I had tried it for my first time in Australia. That was a standard dose, and I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. I mean, very luckily for me, I've only had one bad experience with psychedelics in my entire life, and I've tried a wide variety of them at this point. Um, but this was not my first experience. No, I'm very thankful for that.
Okay, good. Um, okay, so how long ago did this LSD trip in question? When did this take place, and what was the set and setting like? Just start walk me into it. What happened?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I would just like to give a brief overview to this story before I really
Yeah,
dive into it because it does have a lot of length to it and a lot of depth. I'm going to try to keep it succinct, but I mean, with such an experience when it becomes so powerful, there's just so much nuance to it and there's so much depth. So I just thought maybe like an overview would be quite beneficial before I really dived into it.
absolutely.
So really, this is the story of how I met a Welsh witch shortly after arriving in England. I was given some liquid LSD, accidentally overdosed said LSD by a sizable margin, prayed to a tree, became possessed by an old Scotsman, forgot how to speak or even understand English, mistook everyone as stick figure aliens, glimpsed and envisioned quite possibly the most high definition imagery I've ever seen in my entire life, being an Indian goddess lying on her side and blending into the hillside. And ultimately, how I emerged from the entire experience as a stronger person, and how it all had a very, very curious ending to it that still baffles me to this day. So, this experience all began, as I mentioned, shortly after arriving in England. I had moved to London. It was 2021, summer of 2021, and I had arranged for myself a whole number of different festivals that I was going to attend. And for one of my festivals, I was going completely alone. This is how I planned it. I wanted to go there and I wanted to volunteer for them. And you could get in there for free. This was like the whole idea of volunteering, but I wanted to go there because you could meet a whole range of new colorful characters, and I indeed did meet a variety of colorful characters at this festival.
Is this
So
like
I
a
arrived
music
there.
festival, or like what kind of a festival is this going to be?
This was a festival. It was called the Green Man Festival, actually, and
Okay.
it's in Wales. It's in a it's in a national park. It's called Brecon Beacons, and I travelled out there by bus, and then I made my way up to the festival site. And I arrived there, and I started setting up my camp, and just started meeting everybody. And it moved to the second night, and I met this very very colourful character who I know just for like descriptive purposes, she reminded me of like a witch. And I mean, she was a lovely character, and I actually had a lot of conversation with her. But she did remind me of a witch with her bag full of mixtures and tricks and everything, and all the goodies. And being quite bold of myself, it was only after about 30 minutes of conversation with her, I just went out on a limb and I was saying, hey, what's the chances that you may have like something on you? And she just sort of laughed at me and she said, "Yeah, well, I do have something on me." And I said, "Okay, great. Well, I mean, what do you have?" And she was like, she shuffled around in her magic purse and she pulled out quite literally a vial of liquid LSD. And it was probably about this full with a pet in the top, a standard vial. So, I mean, it was enough LSD to put a small village, on the moon, honestly. And it was the second night of the festival, and I was really looking forward to getting into the music. I'd met a whole bunch of buddies at that stage. So I just said, all right, great. Well, like, I want to buy a certain amount of LSD. And I ended up giving her like quite a sizable amount of cash for what was exchanged, and she was very liberal in the amount that she gave me. And she had it in a vial, of course, so we're wondering about how we are going to store this. And she said, if you bring me some biscuits, I could pipette drop them onto these biscuits because the sugar within the biscuit actually helps to preserve it. And I thought, okay, fabulous, let's do that. So I went out and I came back with some biscuits. And she she took out the pipette and she filled it up and she just started to routinely drop them onto all these different biscuits that I had. And she probably pipetted about 20 droplets onto a grand total of 10 different biscuits. And I wrapped it up and I put it away in my bag and I enjoyed the rest of the festival. I got her number and she left me with a commentary of, well, you know, just be in a safe location and keep your mind open and yeah, just do your best not to get too shocked and just enjoy the experience. And I thought, haha, yeah, okay, that's fine. I've done LSD before. I'm expecting a standard dosage. So that was the final commentary that she left me with. And I went back to London and I was staying with a friend at the time. And then a sunny day came along and I said to him, okay, I'm going to finally do this LSD that she had given me. So I went to a park just outside of London. It's called Richmond Park. It's probably the largest park in the area. And it's fantastic because when you're direct in the center of it, it does feel like you are in the wilderness, which is exactly what I want, at least, in an experience. I know it's different for many other people. Like, I've met many people who prefer to be sitting in their lounge when they do these things. But me, I want to be completely surrounded by greenery because I am a firm believer that the best trip sitter that will ever exist in this world is nature herself. And nobody can top that, not one bit. So I went there and it's great because there are deer wandering around as well. And yeah, there's a funny occurrence actually happened with the deer in a few hours. So I arrive there and I sit down on this log and I'm like, okay, I'm in the park, so I can take it now. And I took out one of the biscuits and I just bit off half of the biscuit, expecting that to be, well, that was one pipette drop, right? And half an hour passes and I'm starting to feel really, really good. Like, it's a sunny day and the birds are singing, the sun is shining, everything is in bloom. And I was walking through a botanical garden at the time, which is right in the center of Richmond Park. And I mean, my brain is being absolutely flooded by serotonin at this point. So I am just loving life, like I just feel like Little Red Riding Hood skipping through the magical forest. And I'm looking at bees sort of flying around here as well. And I'm seeing them in like further detail with each passing minute. And the sunlight is starting to take on tangible form. And I'm like, all right, it's starting to come along now. Um,
Okay, and just to be clear, so like this was just one of the biscuits. So you're like, okay, this was like a drop that you ate.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So I had bitten half of the biscuit. She had put in two drops on
Okay.
on one biscuit. on either side,
Gotcha.
and conveniently the biscuit had like a indent where you're supposed to snap it in half. So I was like, all right, I just eat half of this biscuit, right?
Okay. All right. Okay.
But what I didn't account for is, and what she later clarified with me at the end of this entire thing, is that one pipette droplet does not equate to one standard dose. And
Okay.
if you think about it for 1 minute, which I should have, of course it doesn't, because a droplet coming out of your standard pipette is much larger than what would ultimately occupy a tab, right? Your standard tab. I I mean, with the experience that I had, I expect, and I've done LSD before, I expected it to be about 4 to 5 times more powerful than your standard dosage of LSD. So I'm very, very, very happy that it wasn't my first experience, and
Yeah.
that I
No
was in a
kidding.
great, that I was in a great environment as well, and that there was nothing but like bees and flowers surrounding me. Because if there was anything else, I don't know what would have happened to me. But it was very powerful. And I was starting to get an inclination of how powerful it was by the second half hour, the 60-minute mark, where I thought, okay, I need to sit down because things are very colorful. The sunlight is waving at me at this point. The flowers are sort of smiling at me, and the bees are starting to speak to me. I'm starting to get a little bit uneasy. So I'm starting to get like, I don't normally get come up anxiety with a whole load of different things, psilocybin or anything else, but I was in this scenario because it was just so potent. So I sat down, I like dug my hands into the ground, I was trying to earth myself as much as I possibly could, and it's starting to get incredibly potent at this point. You know, things are starting to turn into like tapestries. You know, like I would look at a scene, it would start to blend into like a 2D tapestry, and things take on extra contour. And I'm looking at this old gnarled tree that's sticking up out of the middle of the brush that I've firmly placed myself into, and I'm surrounded by ferns at this point. And I don't know what came over me, but I just decided to start praying to this tree. I was just like, you know what? Like, this is probably not the most crazy thing that I could be doing at this point. This is quite common, you know. Like, if anything, like the tree's going to give me some great wisdoms, and I'll be a happy chappy. So I start like praying to this tree, and I'm like, oh, mighty tree spirit, please be merciful. Please, please, please be merciful. And he was because he blessed my trip from that point onwards, and I was very happy with it. The second hour came around though, and I found myself still sitting in this brush, and at this point, time was starting to become a little bit irrelevant because I was just swimming in colors, and the sun just remained directly above me the entire time, and I was starting to get a little bit dehydrated. I drank all my water as well. I filled it up, luckily, later on. But I'm sitting there in the brush, and I just sort of like, I poked my head up because I decided to finally time to move on. And there is a walkway about 50 meters away from me, and people are walking along it, and people are looking really quite curious as well. And then whilst I'm looking at it, a deer sticks its head up, like right next to me. And I had no idea that deer were in Richmond Park at this point. Okay. Nobody had told me. I'm a tourist in this city. You know, I've only been here for a month. And it absolutely terrifies me, freaks the shit out of me, because I didn't know that the English just let deer roam around in their parks, right? So close to London. And I'm like, I'm looking at this thing, it stuns me, but I'm like, okay, no, no, like it's a deer. It is a deer, even though it looks weird, it is a deer. But its eyes had separated. It separated from one eye into a sort of semi-attached double eye on either side, and its nose was looking alien, and its horns were sort of like wrapping around as well, and they looked like tendrils coming out of its head, and it just like sat there munching this grass, staring at me. And this is the funniest thing about animals as well, is they know when you're tripping. Like animals most certainly know when you're tripping. So like squirrels, or I mean, I've seen a kangaroo once on my first trip with LSD, and they always stare at you like, "Oh my gosh, this guy's tripping. This guy is tripping. Oh, I don't know if I should be making fun of him or not, but he's tripping."
That deer has
And
probably just been like sitting there watching you the whole time, just munching his grass, like, oh,
yeah,
look at this kid.
look at this guy right here. Look him go. Yeah, maybe I should like make fun of him or not. Maybe I should like freak him out or whatever. But the deer finally gets bored of me and walks away. And I'm like, all right, okay, like let's not like lie on the ground anymore. Let's get up and let's start to walk. So I moved my way out of the brush and I started to walk down this pathway. And I realized that I cannot understand English at all. Not one bit. This is like 2.5 hours in, and I was in the throes of the experience. And English now sounds like some weird alien language, and I still remember what it sounds like. And like,
Because
I'm
you're
gonna,
walking by people at this point, like you can hear people talking just on the
yeah,
path.
yeah. I'm
Okay.
walking past them, and like,
Okay.
I'm trying not to look like
Yeah.
a crazy guy, but I know that like my face is sweating and my eyes would be like,
Yeah. Saucers.
yes, sauces, exactly. But I'm like, you know what? Nobody cares. I don't care. It's not like anybody's going to call the police or something. They're enjoying their day. So I'm walking down this path and I'm listening to English, and I'm going to sound ridiculous on this recording, but I'm going to do it anyway. And what it sounds like to me now is it sounds like. I'm like, okay.
Like a
Or,
cartoon character, a nondescript cartoon character or something.
yeah, yeah. I'm like, okay, whatever. I suppose that's kind of funny. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I don't need to understand English at this point anyway. And people look particularly strange. So everyone has enlarged heads, but they're all walking. Their bodies have been like squished into this really slender stick figure like figure with arms jutting out at right angles and their legs jutting out as well, and they're all walking like this as well, like a stick figure just sort of walking down the path. And I'm like, all right, well, that's humorous, cool, why not? Like, let's just go with it, like, hilarious. So I can't understand English, and everybody looks like stick figure aliens. And I'm like, cool, awesome. This is some really potent LSD. It may have been a little bit more than a standard dose. And here I'm guesstimating, yeah, it's probably getting up there. I think I may have screwed up a little bit. But I move past the pathway and I move around this pond and I get to the other side. And from this point, I have this phenomenal view of the hillside. And I am just beholden to the marvelous spectacle of just England in summer bloom, and it was just fantastic. And I'm really enjoying it, and I'm enjoying the colors. I'm enjoying just the flowers. I'm enjoying the greenery and everything. And then, in the midst of me just enjoying flowers and everything, I'm joined by spontaneously joined by a Scotsman, this intrusive Scotsman who just decides to join me on my experience. And as far as I was aware, he was completely independent as well. This is always the question when it comes to psychedelics, though. Is it your mind made manifest, or is it something else? And
Like crossing some other plane
right,
or okay.
exactly. exactly. You know, many theories like you're moving into the spiritual realms. You know, like the veil between worlds is like weakening. You know, all these different
Right.
theories. Um, and I'm open to them all. You know, I'm really open to them all, and I find a lot of basis and truth and evidence in, well, not evidence, but a lot of basis in a lot of them. So I'm open to a lot of different theories, and I probably have psychedelics to thank for that as well.
Mhm.
Open mindedness, and he comes in here completely independent, and he just starts talking to me. Okay, and
Is this like okay? So you've now like walked past these people. You're in this beautiful scenery.
Mhm.
Is this something that's like you sense the presence? Is this like a voice you're hearing? Just something you've embodied? Like, how did you experience this Scotsman?
Yeah, it was a
Or
voice. It was a very,
okay,
very clear voice. It wasn't a
okay,
presence or anything like that. It was just a voice that just suddenly just jumped into my head.
okay.
And he had a very thick, distinct Scottish accent. Kind of reminded me of my grandfather, actually, who's Scottish himself. Although I'm not sure who he is. My current
Okay,
going theory is that he's my grandfather, right?
okay.
So he's in my head and he's just having a conversation with me. I'm sitting there and I'm just talking like, oh wow, look at that, look at this, look at the sunshine, look at this day, this is amazing, I'm absolutely loving it. And this Scotsman is there as well, and he's like he's just talking to me, he's just agreeing with me, you know, he's just like, it is a marvelous day. Look at this, oh look at that over there, oh wow, look at this, lad, have a look at this over here, look at that, that's fantastic, look at the colours in this flower, this is amazing, wow, how did you get here? And I mean, I haven't done a Scottish accent in a while. I'm probably going to butcher it, but he's walking around and he's like, "Aye, lad, the sheer majesty of nature just laid out before you, like paintbrush strokes, the tapestry just sprawled out before you, laid before your eyes, before for your very delight." And I'm like, yeah. I mean, it's phenomenal, it isn't it? Thank you for joining me on this marvelous, colourful day, random Scotsman. I'm so happy that you could be here. Like, let's talk about it. You know,
Yeah, great to have a
um,
pal on this journey. Thanks.
yeah, great. Thanks for having a pal on this journey. It's like my spirit animal is this old Scotsman. so, uh, so I just started having a conversation with him, and then I plant myself firmly once again on this seat because I decided that I needed to ground myself once again because I'm starting to rock back and forth, you know, like it's not like it was overwhelming, but I had a fear that like I might like fall over into the ground at this point or something because it was so potent. It was such a powerful experience. So I take a seat on this bench. I'm looking at this hillside. And out of this hillside emerges this this goddess, this entity, and she was blended perfectly into the hillside where her so the hillside, and I've actually been back to this park to have a look at it to make sure that it wasn't a hallucination itself, that the hillside was at least there. And this hillside, when you look at it from the position that I was at, actually does look like a woman lying on her side. She has her shoulders, and then it moves up to the small of her back, and then up to her hips, and then sort of trails down to the end of her legs. And in the midst of my trip, I was looking at this hillside, and out of this hillside, I see this Indian goddess, and she has the head of Ganesh, the Indian goddess with the elephant head, right? But I mean, Ganesh is male normally, so I was looking at a female rendition of this Indian god. And she was laying there and she had tusks coming out of her mouth, but her body was human. Okay. And she had like smaller ears, I suppose. It wasn't like a very large elephant ears or anything like this. But she had this radiant smile on her face as she was staring there looking at me. And it was quite possibly the most high definition image I've ever seen in my entire life. Like the colors and the fractals as I focused in on the smile were just increasing in depth and complexity every time I tried to just look deeper into it. And it was marvelous. It was absolutely phenomenal. And she's smiling at me this entire time. And I just sit there and I am just in complete awe at her because I don't know like what most people would do when they see a god staring back at them. But you know, I know many people, and if I was religious myself, I would call it religious experience, right? And I gave it all the due respect that it was deserving of in that moment. So I sat there and I just enjoyed this imagery, and it was marvelous. And I was just it, completely appreciative of and basking in the radiance of her smile, and it felt so warming. It was marvelous. It was really just a overwhelming happiness and surety that I have never felt in my entire life. I mean, I've felt happiness and surety in my life many times before, but this was at a next level. And it was beautiful and it was warming. And still to this day, I am just incredibly appreciative of it and just the moment that it gave me. So I sit there and I enjoy the spectacle for as long as I can before I eventually decide that it is time to move on. And she had started to disappear into the landscape at this point. It's like she came and visited me and really just smiled at. She didn't say anything. She didn't transmit any particular thought into my mind. She just sat there and smiled at me. The more I looked at her smile, the more I realized what she was smiling about. It was really just enjoy this, enjoy everything, be appreciative, be happy, and you have nothing to worry about. And that was it. That's just the thought that just radiated through my mind. But she started to fade into the landscape. She had delivered her message and she had moved on. So I decided to move on with my day at this point as well.
Had
And
the Scotsman there for this part, or had he already moved on?
well, the Scotsman had actually moved on at that point as well. He hung around for about an hour before he decided, okay, I'm
Gotta
off.
go.
I'm off. Like, catch
Yeah.
you around. Enjoy it. Maybe I'll come and visit you at
Yeah.
some other point when you accidentally overdose on LSD.
When you eat the other half of the biscuit, I'll be
When you
back.
eat the other half of the biscuit, I'll be back. Yeah,
I'm just one biscuit away, young man.
young one, just one biscuit away. If you ever need to call on me again, yeah. So he was gone at that point, and I decided to move on with my day. At this point, it was starting to get a little bit darker, so I was like, okay. And they were about to close the park within the next half an hour, so I was like, all right, I don't want to be fumbling around, and I don't want to be talking to security. And I didn't particularly want to leave because I was still tripping bollocks. Okay, like it was just so potent still. But I realized that I had to. I
How
still
many
had.
hours do you think you're in at this point? Like since you first took the
This was
dose?
about the fifth hour. Like I did sit
Okay.
on that bench, just staring at it for an hour straight.
Okay.
And I didn't even realize it was an hour. It felt like 15 minutes, right? But when I took out, when I had the capacity to pull my phone out of my pocket and engage with technology, which is something I hate doing. I hate
Yeah.
engaging with technology during a trip.
Mhm.
that was actually the cause for my one ever bad trip in my entire life. So I've made the rule to stay away from it since then. But I had taken my phone out, and I'm like, okay, wow, it's a lot later than I was expecting. I need to leave. So I left the park and I started to walk through Richmond, and I hopped on the overground, and that was completely fine. Like, the overground, I could still have a view of the outside world, so I still had something to look at. But I made it to central London, where I needed to hop on the underground, the tube, the subway to get to my friend's house where I was staying. And I normally hate taking the tube, like even when I'm sober. Like, I just don't think it's a very pleasant experience at all.
Is it because it's underground, or is it just because of how it's set up, or
Yeah, I mean, it's underground. The London underground is like particularly dusty and filthy, and the air quality is terrible. You're breathing in dust. You're breathing in a lot of different dusts from many
right?
many different years.
And you've just
So
had this beautiful outdoor experience. So yeah, it's like particularly unappealing.
exactly, right, exactly. I was comparing it to like just
Yeah.
nature majesty, which I had experienced for the last 5 hours, and I'm like, okay, I really
Mm.
don't want to do this. And some angst was starting to kick in as I was hopping onto the escalator to take me down to the depths of the deep dark belows. And in the London Tube, I'm sure it's the same with many other tubes around the world. Like on certain parts of the tracks, it really screeches and screams as it grinds up, and the tube comes screeching around the corner, and I hallucinate this thing to be this giant, raging, mechanical dragon roaring around the corner, just screeching, charging at me with ferocity. I'm just like sitting there like this. And the dragon parks up, and I consolidate myself, and I board the dragon. And I sit down inside the mechanical dragon, and it takes off. And everything is horrible, like the screeching of the tracks, senses are incredibly heightened, like you're really starting to see like all the different details and everything. And I'm sitting on this tube for about 5 minutes, and this homeless guy comes walking and enters my carriage that I was seated on. And this is 2021, so everybody is still wearing masks. Like, I mean, half of people on the tube at this point in time are still wearing masks. And this guy's wearing a mask as well. And very tragically, this guy had blood in his mask as well. So, this is like the entirety of this story at this point had been sunshine and rainbows, and this is when it wasn't sunshine and rainbows anymore. And this guy's blood in his mask, and he's asking for change, and all I see, and I'm so sorry about how I'm going to describe this one homeless guy. I don't want to do him any insult, but I need to describe what I saw when I was still on this very potent trip. And all I see is like this bloodied, malnourished, like cadaver almost. And it was horrible. Like I just felt such horror at this moment. Like the blood was just so red in his mask as well. And yeah, I don't think there's any real sentiment to draw from this part of the story, but I suppose it's really just that, there is a dark and there is a light to like anyone's psychedelic experience, right? And this is still the dark and the light made material in the material world, but you can really see how it can shift quite drastically from even something that would not shift you normally can shift you in the moment. I've seen blood before. So it's not like anything too drastic. I mean, it was on his face mask, but yeah, it was very shocking in the moment. And I eventually leave the tube and I make it back to my friend's house. And at this point, luckily enough, I can understand English once again. Fantastic. But I can't speak it. Okay. And I haven't actually spoken any words to anyone for about like 7 hours straight, 8 hours straight at this point. Like the last person I spoke to was my friend when I left his house in the morning. And I mean, he's taken LSD before, so like he's no stranger to all of this. I'm like sitting
You're not
there.
too weird when you get back there. He's like, "Oh, gotcha. Okay."
Yeah, he's like, got you. Don't worry, buddy. Like, I'm gonna get you some like herbal tea, and I'm gonna get you
Yeah.
some essential oils, and you're gonna be okay. Don't
Yeah.
worry about
You're
it.
all right.
Yeah,
You're
and
descending.
um, I, I try to form sentences, but I cannot at all, and I'm just sort of like fumbling over my words, and he's laughing at it, and I start to laugh at it, and we just cannot stop laughing at it. It's hilarious. And I mean, later on that evening, like it took me about 4 hours to go to sleep as well, because like I was still tripping at that point. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw phenomenal fractals, like these large sort of mathematical matrices, like shifting and sort of rotating. And I'd be able to see it from different perspectives. And it was, I mean, it was very strange. I do see like mathematical matrices a lot of the time whenever I close my eyes, whenever I'm tripping. But this one was particularly detailed. So, yeah, I eventually get to sleep and I wake up the next day and I recover because my brain had taken quite the beating at that point. I'm all for the therapeutic benefits of psychedelics, but I think it's very much dosed, moderated, and mediated, and I don't think anybody should take that amount of LSD at all, unless you are hoping for a phenomenal experience, because that is most certainly what you will get if you're in the correct environment. So, um, yeah, and this is where things get very, very curious because I tell my friend about this and he's like, wow, that's a pretty phenomenal trip. Like, you should write that down or
Yeah.
something. And I'm
It's
like, no,
unusual.
this is unusual, okay? And I'm like, no need to write it down. Like this is burnt to the recesses of my mind until the day that I die. And I decide to message my Welsh witch friend who I first got the LSD from. And I tell her, hey, like, thanks for the LSD, but I accidentally overdosed it and I had this phenomenal experience. And she was like, all right, well, like, why don't you tell me about it? And I was like, okay. And I sent her a voice message. And she replies with something that still baffles me to this day. When I mentioned to her that I saw the goddess Shiva, no, the goddess Ganesh, she says to me, well, the acid that I gave you was Shiva acid. And in Indian mythology, Shiva is like the father of Ganesh. I didn't even know there's different types of acid, right? Like, I don't, I didn't know that at all, but apparently there's different types of acid and people name it different things. And she had named it Shiva acid. Well, she didn't name it, but the acid that she had is called Shiva acid. And she did not tell me this before I tripped. Okay, so something very curious was going on here. Like, why was it that I was tripping on Shiva acid and I was shown the goddess Ganesh in the midst of my trips?
That's crazy. I
Yeah,
wonder if other people, yeah, it's like, how often did other people have that I mean, not same experience, but like, what other types of Indian and Hindu gods and goddesses are just showing up for people, or
Yeah,
symbolism and things like that. That's crazy.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I don't know what the relation is. You know, I'd very much like to believe that there is something out there in the ether that has embedded itself onto this particular type of acid, and when you use this type, then you sort of like call onto that part of the ether or whatever you want to call it, right? But I'm sure I'm just sort of making up stories, and I don't know. I don't know. I just find it to be very strange and very, very curious. So that happened, and that's the entirety of my trip as it happened. But I mean, there's a lot of different morals and principles that and strengths that I took from this. And boiling down to it, I think the two elements from my experience that I still draw strength from today really is one, the Scotsman who decided to join me, and two, envisioning this goddess. And for the Scotsman, this is really just because I think Western society has done a very poor job in really establishing such notions as ancestors and ancestry, and spiritual lineages and family lineages, and really the mark that that can leave on you, and the collective effort that went into making you as a person and all the ancestors that came before you, right? I think Western society, technological society, has grown very detached from this idea, mostly because we don't give much credence to the spiritual realms and the spiritual practices. We have grown to be without religion and without spirituality for the most part in Western technological society. And I think one of the tragedies of all of this is that we have just become completely separated from the idea of ancestors. And this is a very prevalent part in many indigenous societies around the world, and they use these different plant sacraments, be it psilocybin mushrooms or iboga or ayahuasca or peyote or San Pedro or whatever it may be. And a large part of it is to really connect to not only the community at present, to strengthen the spirit of the community at present, but to also connect them to their ancestors. And as far as anthropology and ethnopharmacology and ethnobotany is concerned, this is what they report. They report that it gives them great connection, direct connection to their ancestors. And I was still ill experienced in this field. I come from a scientific background. My grandparents were religious, but my parents were not. And over the last 5 years, I've grown in spirituality, and I've grown in inclination to many different religious principles and these ideas. And for me, really, the strength that I drew from this is that as a person with Scottish ancestry, what if by some rogue chance, when I had taken this LSD, I did tap into some sort of spiritual realm, and it wasn't just my mind made manifest. And I was actually joined by a spirit, right, who does exist out there, even to this moment, out in the ether. And he did decide me to join me in that moment because he was scarily independent in the way that he spoke. I was talking to him, and he was replying in ways that I don't know why I would talk like that. I don't know why my mind would think that, right? And I do understand how it could be a mind made manifest, but in this instance, I've decided that it doesn't really matter if it is just my mind made manifest, because the strength that I draw from it, of the idea that this companion had joined me on the day, and that he may be just out there, just beyond the realm, just beyond the veil, ready to be called on whenever I decide to eat the other half of the biscuit, is an incredibly empowering idea. And it's one that I have decided that it doesn't really matter if I just made it up in my mind, because I draw a lot of strength from it, and it reminds me of my heritage. And it's nice to know that I may have something like a guardian angel or a spirit animal, be that spirit animal a Scotsman, why not? And yeah, it's just nice, the idea of a companion who is there to back you up. I've had many instances in my life where I have very closely died. I once got pulled out into the ocean by a rip. I've almost been completely obliterated by a truck whilst I was on my bike. And in those moments, I so narrowly cheated death. And I've come to believe, like, wow, there was definitely a guardian angel who like grabbed my shoulder and pulled me just out of the way of that truck. Or there was a guardian angel who gave me the strength to swim back in the shore. So I really like this idea, and it's one that I still hold to myself even to this day, and it gives me strength. And the second element from my trip experience that I draw sentiment from is the Indian goddess, of course. So this one is really quite simple, actually. I think it's, I've read a lot of anecdotal evidence from people who have taken potent psychedelics, particularly ayahuasca. I'm very well knowing of the idea of mother ayahuasca, these loving entities that can join you in these states and that can actually be there to either break you down, build you up, fill you with hope, fill you with love. And I am a strong believer in them. I do believe that they are entities and that they do live out there somewhere, either in your mind or in some sort of realm beyond. And in this moment, I do believe that I was met by a goddess. And she just had one simple message, which was just enjoy, be happy, smile, know that you were loved, know that you are capable of love, and know that you're here for a good time. Yet do have things to do, as I have learned in other trips, but that you are loved, and be happy. Don't overcomplicate things. Just enjoy. It will be over before you know it. So just enjoy it. And simple enough. It's one that a lot of people have spoken of, and it's one that I still draw strength from, even to this day. And it's beautiful. So, yeah, those are the two sentiments that I really drew from it, as well as the many other curious, hilarious episodes that occurred within it. I don't recommend anybody to take that amount of LSD or to mistakenly take that amount of LSD. It was far too much. I adapted to it and I really quite enjoyed it. But just like then, this is why I mentioned this episode on the tube on the underground. Just as easily, it can move into realms of horror if you are not careful. Because I was truly terrified in that moment. Like I felt like this corpse was approaching me. So it can shift into realms of horror just as easily. So what I would like to remind people of who are listening to this episode is caution. I don't recommend this amount, but if you would ever do this amount, be very cautious and be damn well sure that you are in a beautiful environment where you can either bask in the sun or just enjoy colorful scenery.
Don't take the tube. Listen, everybody, don't take the tube.
Don't take the tube. Do not take the tube. Yeah, yeah. I should have just laid there under the stars and just hid from the security guards that come roaming through the park because it
Get
would have
back into
been
the brush with the deer, wait it out till morning,
exactly. It would have been so much more enjoyable, and I would have had even more stories to tell from it. But I decided to go back. So yeah, that was my experience with a phenomenally large amount of LSD.
Well, it definitely sounds like you handled it very well. Being able to find humor in what could be a possibly extremely overwhelming situation is a very valuable skill for a psychonaut to have, right? Being able to find the humor because really at any moment, any of it can turn into horror if you let your mind crank the situation. You could have
Mhm.
easily lost it seeing people walking around with giant heads looking like stick figures. I mean, that could be
Yeah.
incredibly scary or jarring in another mindset. Or, like you had said, if perhaps this had been your first experience with LSD, how could you possibly know how to reconcile that? So,
Yeah.
yes, a substantially large dose that for most perhaps is not recommended. However, aside from the detour into the horrors of down under the ground, I
Mhm.
mean, what an incredibly beautiful experience. Most people will never see anything like that in their entire lives. Regardless of, I've taken substantially large doses of psychedelics and I've had a lot of incredible visuals, but maybe nothing quite to that magnitude that you're describing with seeing this this deity. Um, that's pretty unique and incredible. Yes, maybe the message is simple in its essence, but it was delivered in such a powerful format that, like you said, like you will carry that with you through the rest of your life, and then by you carrying that, you're spreading that message the rest of your life. It will continue to impact other people for years to come, just like it just did me now.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think some of the more simple messages are some of the more powerful ones as well. I think there is power in simplicity. And I've had other experiences before where the messages are very direct, and those are the ones that leave a lasting effect in your psyche and in your memory. The ones that are complicated, you just sort of get bored with them. It just sort of fizzles into nothing because if something is really truthful, it's impactful and it's direct and it's short and it's
Mhm.
concise, and you get the message like that.
Mhm.
And it was the case with this, yeah, like you said, this deity that gave me this message. So yeah, it was very enlightening, and kind of want to do it again at some point, even
I
though I
was gonna
don't
say that
condone that
that's
amount of
my
LSD. But I kind of want to do it again at some point in my life. Probably not for some years, but at some point, maybe.
that was my gonna be my last question for you. When's the next biscuit in the park day? I assume you still have them all bundled away somewhere, just waiting for the right moment.
No, actually, I mean those biscuits. I used them to microdose for a year straight. Actually,
Oh,
I
nice.
I
Nice.
grounded the remaining. I had it in my friend's fridge, his freezer, when I was staying with him for an entire month, and I had this plastic Tupperware, and I just wrote "Beware" on the top of it. I didn't want my friend to wake up in the middle of the night, have like some midnight munchies, and just like all
And just
biscuits,
go
and
to town.
just go to town on like all 12 remaining biscuits, because then he would go back to bed and literally see God himself. He would see core of creation laid before him whilst he's laying there in his bed on a Tuesday evening whilst he's trying to get to sleep. So I didn't want to do that to my friend. So I went to the effort to write "Beware" on the top of the Tupperware lid. But I ground that up into a powder, and I basically figured out the amount of powder that I would need to take whenever I wanted a microdose. And luckily, I did my mathematics correctly because I never like accidentally overdosed or anything like this. And yeah, I used it for 1 year. And I mean, I really enjoy microdosing with LSD as well. I think it's a great way to inspire creativity, problem solving skills as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, I used that, and I needed to because the biscuits were starting to get a little bit manky, but
Yeah.
I made use of it.
Oh, I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing today. I loved hearing your story. I hope we can meet up and chat about another experience again soon.
Yeah, I would love to do that.